It began as the kind of morning the town of Hinata had always known, sunlight spilling onto fishing boats, market stalls waking up with chatter, and salt hanging thick in the breeze. Mei Tanaka, a young schoolteacher, rode her bicycle past the docks, waving to Mr. Sudo sweeping his porch, the children from her class chasing each other barefoot down the lane. It was ordinary, peaceful, until the tremor came. At first, it was a rumble beneath her tires. Then, the earth jolted. A sudden snap that sent market crates toppling and birds screaming into the sky. Minutes passed. Then came the silence. A silence too wide, too unnatural. And then, the roar. From the edge of town, May saw the sea rising, not receding, but towering, like something ancient waking. The waves swallowed the horizon, devouring the line between ocean and land. Panic took hold. Mothers grabbed children. Shopkeepers abandoned their wares. The streets were flooded not with water, not yet, but with fear. May didn't hesitate. She turned her bike around, pedaling faster than she ever had, yelling for her students. Shepherding them toward the hill behind the school, her voice cracked from shouting. Hands clutched hers. Children wept. Some resisted, screaming for parents lost in the confusion. But May pressed on, pulling them up the slope as the wall of water thundered closer. The waves struck with no mercy. Homes crumbled like paper, boats shattered against concrete. The school disappeared in seconds. The sound was unbearable, metal twisting, glass exploding, the unrelenting rush of a sea unbound. May and her students made it just in time, huddled on the high ground, soaked in sea spray. Watching their world drown, they held each other. Some screamed, some fell into a stunned silence. Hours passed before the ocean released its grip. The water receded, leaving behind a mangled wasteland of debris, splintered wood, and overturned cars. Where once there had been streets and laughter, now stood silence and ruin. May walked barefoot through the mud, searching for anything familiar. Her house was gone. The school, nothing left but torn notebooks floating in puddles. The air smelled of salt and diesel. Her limbs ached, but her mind stayed sharp. She needed to find survivors. She needed to account for the missing. She needed to be more than just a teacher now. The sky darkened with the approach of night, but May remained upright, her arms wrapped around a trembling child. Behind her, the children she'd saved watched her with wide eyes, waiting for a sign, any sign that they were going to be okay. And somehow, May found her voice again, not loud, not perfect, but steady. "We're still here," she said, "and that means we begin again." Morning after the tsunami brought a silence that felt almost cruel, no engines, no shouting, not even birdsong. Just the slap of water against twisted wreckage and the soft sobs of survivors trying to understand what remained. Mei Tanaka woke beneath a tarp someone had strung between two trees, her arms still wrapped around Hana, the youngest of her students. The hilltop had become a refuge overnight, dotted with frightened families, elderly neighbors, and children who hadn't spoken since the wave. There was no official rescue, no sound of helicopters or sirens, so the survivors began to move, slowly and instinctively. May helped organize a search party, starting with names. She wrote each one she knew on a scrap of school paper, her students, their parents. The grocer, the fishmonger, Mr. Sudo. Each name spoken aloud was a form of hope, and each unanswered name carved a small wound in her heart. Mr. Sudo was found wandering near the edge of the market ruins, carrying only a soaked photo of his wife. May guided him back to the hill. His eyes were distant, but when he spoke, it was only to say, she loved the sea. She never thought it would take her. The old community center, though battered, still stood. Its windows were gone, its floor soaked, but it became their base. Neighbors gathered candles, pots, rice sacks from collapsed homes. Volunteers made rice porridge from whatever they could salvage. May helped wash scrapes, soothed crying children, and tended to a boy with a broken arm using an old wooden ruler and strips of cloth. They started to build something, not houses, not yet, but the shape of community. A place where grief didn't have to be quiet. Where a meal could mean comfort, and sitting shoulder to shoulder meant no one had to feel the weight alone. In the evenings, they lit candles and placed them along the crumbled seawall. For the missing, for the dead, for memory. Each night May added more names to the list, her handwriting growing smaller as space ran out. She feared forgetting someone, she feared leaving someone out, she feared the names that would never be found. But in the quiet, something sacred grew. Strangers became neighbors. May found herself holding more hands than she could count, guiding, comforting, simply being present. The disaster had taken so much, but it had also laid bare a deeper truth: they still had each other. In that first week, no one spoke of rebuilding. The pain was too raw, the loss too large. But every time someone added a name to May's list, every time someone shared a meal or sang to a crying child, it felt like placing the first brick. Grief filled the air like smoke, but in its midst, flickers of light began to spark. And May, though hollowed by loss, carried on. Because someone had to remember. Because someone had to start. After the wave, Part 3, Building from Brokenness, expanded. The days following the disaster blurred together, a haze of sweat, mud, and aching limbs. Relief teams finally began to trickle in, tents from NGOs, crates of clean water, satellite phones, but the town of Hinata had already started saving itself. May stood at the center of it, clipboard in hand, organizing shifts and supplies. Guiding children into a makeshift school shaded by salvaged tarps and bright optimism. Each morning, the townspeople gathered in the shell of the community center to divide tasks. Some cleared roads. Others repaired fishing nets, and a few coordinated food rations from neighboring villages. Arun, a retired civil engineer who had once dreamed of building resorts along this very coast, offered his blueprints for temporary housing. His designs used bamboo and reclaimed wood, sturdy, simple, and dignified. It gave the survivors more than shelter, it gave them agency. May taught her lessons beneath a tarp strung between tree branches. Chalk scribbled on salvaged blackboard slabs, laughter echoing faintly once more. Children recited poems while their parents labored nearby. These small rituals became anchors. Every copied letter, every memorized story reminded them that life was still possible. Even here, even now. But resilience didn't come without cracks. Tempers frayed under the weight of exhaustion. Food lines stretched long. Arguments sparked over distribution. One afternoon, two young men nearly came to blows over a bag of rice. May stepped between them, not with authority, but with empathy. She asked each what they had lost. Then, she shared her own story. Grief quieted the rage. They embraced by nightfall. The baker, whose shop had been leveled by the wave, began cooking again on a fire pit behind the shelter. Using donated flour and ash-covered trays, he baked simple rolls, steaming and imperfect. He offered them freely to volunteers, to children, to anyone who passed. He said it helped him feel human. People lined up not just for the bread, but for the reminder that kindness could rise like dough. Amid the ruins, other signs of life began to flicker. A young woman painted a mural on a surviving wall, waves transformed into wings, hands lifting one another from floodwaters. A boy found a cat hidden in the ruins and nursed it back to health. The animal became their unofficial mascot, often perched beside May as she taught. It wasn't just recovery, it was rebirth, forged in ash and generosity. And while no one spoke aloud about the grief that clung to their every step, it was there in the silence. In the sudden embraces, in the way strangers became kin. One night, as May walked the edge of the camp, she saw the stars for the first time in days. The sky had cleared, the air was cool, and somewhere beyond the makeshift roofs and firelight, someone began to sing. It was out of tune. But it was beautiful. And it was enough. By the second month, Hinata no longer looked like a disaster zone, it looked like a village made of hope. Tents had become homes, and homes had become hubs of collaboration. What began with scraped-together efforts was now an organized, interwoven network of support. Volunteers from around the world poured in, nurses from Seoul, carpenters from Melbourne, students from Tokyo. But they didn't come as saviors. They came to listen, to join hands, to build. May had become the soul of it all. She coordinated language barriers with a chalkboard and smiles, led town meetings beneath the half-standing roof of the shrine, and listened, always listening. That's how she received the box from Japan, a bundle of letters written by children who had survived their own tsunami nearly a decade earlier. Each note bore crayon drawings, folded cranes, and words that trembled with hope. You are not alone. We cried too, but we still play. You will find your smile again. She read the letters aloud at night by lantern light. The children clutched them as if they were talismans. Even the elders sat quietly, eyes shining. Grief had brought them to their knees. But empathy shared and extended lifted them. Then came the storm. Not from the sea this time, but from the sky, wind and rain and thunder that ripped tarps from frames and bent bamboo like reeds. The wall of the main shelter collapsed just after midnight. May was first to react, rallying the teens to reinforce the beams. No one was injured, but the fear of water returned in waves, silent and shivering. But instead of retreating, they worked. Everyone. Children held lanterns. Elders passed nails. The carpenter from Melbourne offered tools. The baker brewed tea over a flickering stove, handing out warm cups to frozen hands. By sunrise, the wall stood again, patched, uneven, but strong. That morning, May stood at the edge of camp and looked at the hands around her, blistered. Brown, pale, wrinkled, trembling. So many hands. They weren't just rebuilding structures. They were rebuilding each other. Later that week, a young girl approached May with a picture of the shelter. The people, the cat, the bread. And over it, bold in rainbow crayon, "We stay together." May placed the drawing on the wall above her chalkboard. It was a reminder that healing wasn't a straight path, that fear could return, but when it did, it would find them not alone, but held. By hands. By hearts. By each other. A year had passed since the ocean swallowed Hinata. The seasons had cycled through sun and rain, wind and renewal. Where once there had been rubble now stood new homes elevated on stilts, painted in pastel colors. Windows open to breeze and birdsong. The scars of the tsunami remained, but they had softened. Nature had not only taken, it had given back in time, in blossoms, in the rhythm of new routines. The school was no longer a tarp-covered corner of the shelter. It was a real building now, rebuilt on higher ground, its walls bright with student murals, blue waves transforming into trees. Hands forming a circle around a rising sun. May stood in the doorway, greeting children by name, their laughter bouncing down the hill. She no longer kept a list of the living. She kept a book of plans, lesson schedules, garden plots, community festivals. Near the shore, a sapling stood, slender and swaying, surrounded by stones bearing names. It was the memorial tree May had planted in memory of the lost. Mr. Sudo visited often, sometimes to sit in silence, sometimes to share stories with the children who never met his wife but called him Grandpa now. He played chess in the square each morning with Arun, the engineer, who had decided to stay permanently. The baker had rebuilt his shop smaller, but full of scent and warmth. He taught local teens how to knead dough and bake sweet buns, telling them that bread, like life, needs patience and a warm heart. Tourists had begun to return, but not with cameras for tragedy. They came for the resilience. They joined mural painting sessions, bought bread from the bakery, helped plant in the community garden. Some even stayed to volunteer in the school, learning as much as they taught. May, once just a schoolteacher, had become a storyteller. She gave talks about disaster preparedness, wrote letters to other recovering towns, and led ceremonies during storm season, not to remember the terror, but the unity. Her voice trembled sometimes, but it never faltered. On the anniversary, the whole town gathered at the shoreline. Candles were floated in coconut shells onto the sea. They sang the same lullaby that had comforted children in the shelter a year before. And when the last flame disappeared into the darkness, May whispered, "We survived. We rebuilt. And we belong to each other." As night fell, the stars returned. This time, they weren't the same stars that had watched a broken town. They were the stars of a community reborn. Hinata was not as it was before. It was better. Not because the wave had come, but because of what rose after it. Together,